Hey, it's Michael here from the Oilers Live podcast and the Heavy Hockey podcast. Got a great episode for you today. It's in a couple of sort of choppy parts, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Had Eric Friesen as my guest. Just wanted to put a quick note out there for those of you listening. The Oilers Live Cup is coming up on February 29th. And, it's got some meaning. Number one is we're doing a charity for Heart and Stroke Foundation, and which is particularly meaningful to me and a couple of people on the committee we've put together. And that is, my father passed away from heart disease, and we'd like to just put some money towards that and have some fun and do what, brings us all together, which is our love of hockey. And we're going to have spectators, lots of prizes. If you want to sponsor or you want to donate, you can reach out or DM me at Oilers Live on Twitter, or send me an email at michael@oilers.live, or go to the website www.oilers.live, and on the top menu bar there's a note there, or a link that you can get to the Oilers Live Cup. And the other thing I want to say is I dedicate today's episode of the podcast to a good guy that we had a hockey game for back in the summer, and that's Adam Zakuski. And, he passed away on Christmas Day this year, affecting many of us on Twitter. And that got a chance to know him. And if you got a chance to meet him, he was equally a great guy. And just want to say that Adam, we are all thankful for having had the chance to meet you and spend time with you. And the gifts that you brought us will remain with us forever. And that's to hold our families near and dear to us and live every moment with courage and conviction. Because as many people who know you know that, while you were lighthearted to the very end and kept your humor up, you also had a conviction to you and stood by all of the many things that you believed. It just made you the most unique of people. But, thanks so much. And I hope that your family's doing well now, knowing that, the pain is over. You were just a unique guy. And this one goes out to you.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and guests. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.
Hey, it's Michael here from the Heavy Hockey Podcast. I had as my guest tonight on the podcast Eric Friesen, who's been on the show many times. Earlier tonight, we recorded a podcast about the Oilers at the halfway point. I certainly hope that you keep listening and listen in to, what we think is going on with the Oilers at the midway point of the year. But I wanted to put this at the front end of this tonight because I've been hosting Eric's podcast, the 99 Forever podcast, on the Oilers Live channel for this season. And I thought maybe we'd get a chance to talk about that and see how that's going and maybe talk a little bit about where Eric expects that to go. So first off, Eric, welcome again. Tell me, give me a little bit of background about the 99 Forever podcast.
Well, first of all, thank you again for allowing me to be on this platform. It's you're a good friend of mine, and I think that it's pretty cool that we're able to kind of work on this together and allowing me to help build your brand and try and grow the website how we've been able to over the last, at least 4 months that I've been involved with it. But yeah, going back to a year and a half that I've been appearing on the podcast, making my 8th appearance tonight. it's been awesome to work with you and talk Oilers. I mean, yeah, it's like you said, we can always make time to talk Oilers hockey, and yeah, I've really enjoyed doing it. I've had some really interesting guests, a couple friends of mine, and a couple people that I only know just from Twitter, so that's been good too. And one thing that I always try to do on my podcast before we get into the Oilers talk is just kind of find out how they became Oilers fans. I think it's such an interesting thing to hear just everyone's earliest memories of cheering for the team or how they got into hockey at all. So, yeah, you hear people from different eras and different ages. You know, a good friend of mine in Australia didn't discover hockey until 2011. So when you have a guy like that who grew up playing basketball and didn't know anything about hockey, he's only been following it the last decade. And then you have other people I've interviewed who have been following it since the early 90s, late 80s, or there are people who weren't coming from a hockey background or family, and they discovered it as adults themselves. So yeah, it's just everyone's got their own story, and I love to hear that. And then just people from all over different countries that I've talked to, US, Australia, Canada, different parts of Canada. So just you get a well-rounded group of people. And my goals moving forward were to have a new guest for each of the first 10 episodes, and then bring in some recurring people, just so that I could really give as many people an opportunity to come on that wanted to. And I have, other Oiler fans that have DM'd me to ask to come on, and I've DM'd other people to try and set it up as well. So yeah, it's really exciting, and hopefully it's helped you out in any way possible. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to have the content on the Oilers Live channel, and not just to have it for the purposes of the brand or anything like that, but even just to have a listen. So for anybody that's not listened to the 99 Forever podcast, I would strongly encourage you to do that. You've had some great guests. And I've loved, so far the format and where you're taking that. And I wouldn't have had you on, the Heavy Hockey podcast or the Oilers Live podcast so many times if I didn't enjoy the insights that you bring to the game and some of the things that you have. So that's been great. What's one of the things that so far you've been most kind of pleased about in terms of, do you have an episode that was your favorite so far? You've done, 7 episodes now, is it?
I've got my 7th one planned. I've done 6. And I've probably had 2 or 3 other guests that we just couldn't line up a time yet. So I'd like to probably have been at closer to 9 or 10 by Christmas now. We'll try and get those in the new year when timelines kind of line up a little bit and we can work people's schedules out. So yeah, my favorite episode I think is still the first one that I did with Brian Swain from TSN 1260 in Edmonton. He's on the basketball show there on TSN, and it does a lot of local broadcasting in Edmonton, but he is a very knowledgeable hockey fan too and follows the team. And I think that just the first one that we did together, and that I wanted him as my first guest for a while and had talked to him about it, I think that one still stands out as the best. But just even more recently, talking to Larry Fisher from the Hockey Writers and a scout for future considerations, he offered so much insight, and someone that I always enjoy talking to on Twitter. So that's another great guest to have. And yeah, Mike Dursa, who you've had on countless times too. Guys like talking to him. So yeah, there's been some really awesome guests so far.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the Larry Fisher episode, and of course Brian Swain, your friend from Australia. They've all been great episodes, and I don't mean to take away from any of the other ones that you've had on there as well. Everybody's been great. And
Jenna Puliu was
that's right.
Awesome guest to have. You know, I think she might have been the most unique guest I've had, just because she didn't grow up watching hockey. She was had other interests, and just to hear about the whole podcast wasn't even Oilers related. We talked about her journey from Alaska to Nevada, and just kind of how life has evolved for her there, and we talked about her dog, which is very popular on her social media platforms, and just kind of different things like that. So, you know, it's always going to be an Oilers centric podcast. That's going to be the foundation of it and what we're going to talk about the most. But there are other aspects involved, and it's just cool to kind of just find out about these Oiler fans. And I hope that will sort of be the format going forward. Obviously, once I've had guests on 2 or 3 times, I won't be asking each guest that I've had on multiple times to recount their childhood memories of the Oilers time after time. But for any first-time guests, I think that's something that I want to continue to do.
Yeah, and I think, I think it brings a unique perspective to what is a really great fan base. You know, we've all got, as since I've started doing the podcast and doing that, and you know, whether it's Kelly from Beer League Heroes, who's, you know, in Taiwan, to, you know, your friend in Australia, or the Jenna Pulius of Nevada, you know, and the many folks from around the world. We've got the Oiler Brit, you know, Sam in the UK, right?
It's funny. I was just about to mention him. He and I have been DMing time and time again here, and he just sent me one the other day saying that he would love to be on the show soon, and I wanted to have him as well. So you can probably expect him as a guest in January or sometime soon.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, there's just so many folks out there that have come to this team at so many levels, and yet we've had this, you know, which we'll talk about which we talked about and people will get to listen here shortly. But you know, what's been a really sort of hard time for Oilers fans, you know, to see this team not do as well as we would like or hope, with, you know, a couple of the best players in the world on there. So, you know, it's been really unique to listen to some of the stories that you've had told, and I love hearing them. So, you know, continue to do that. I just want to say before we close out this part that you know, it has been a pleasure getting to know you through the podcast, and then getting to meet you and play some hockey. You know, I want to thank you personally for doing doing some extra content, and keep it up. We're
thank you.
We're all having fun.
I look forward to seeing you in a couple months for the Oilers Live Cup in Edmonton. And one of my good friends from Calgary, who isn't a Calgary fan, thankfully, will hopefully be joining us too and playing in the game. So it should be exciting, and let's get this team back on the right foot so we have some more positive things to talk about in the new year.
That's awesome. Thanks again, Eric. And for those of you that are sticking around to listen, which I hope is all of you, you know, hope you enjoy this latest episode of the Heavy Hockey Podcast. Apologize for cutting it short at the end. We had about an hour of recording, and we're recording late night tonight, and so the ending's a little abrupt, but hope everybody enjoys it. Thank you. Oilers Live Podcast. Hey, it's Michael here from the Heavy Hockey Podcast, back for another episode, this time at the halfway point of the Oilers hockey season, which is why I'm happy to have back as one of my guests is the now host of the 99 Forever podcast, which is hosted right here on the Oilers Live channel, Mr. Eric Friesen. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been quite a while since we've had you on the podcast.
Yeah.
When's the last time you were on?
I was just looking it up because I wasn't exactly sure. It was June 12th, the last episode we did. Was a NHL draft preview. So it's been a while. Good to be chatting with you again.
Yeah, it's great. And lots has happened since that time. Notably, we started off with a great first part of the season this year where, I'd like to say as Oilers fans, many of us started to believe that this team was en route. And then we've had a bad December, and we find ourselves on the outside looking in now, going into the new year. One game before the new year, and that's tomorrow night against the New York Rangers. So, Eric, let's maybe, I don't know exactly where to start, but why don't I get your thoughts on the first half of this season for the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, I mean, they started out of the gate incredible. I believe it was their best start since 1985 when they went 5-0 to open the season, and then 7-1. So really, they were looking good out of the gate, and people were saying, if you look at how the rest of the season needs to play out, as long as they went 500 the rest of the way, they should be good enough to get in. The only problem is they haven't been able to maintain that 500 record ever since. It wasn't too long ago, the team was sitting at 18, 10, and 3, I believe, and here we are now at 20, 17, and 4. So obviously a rough month of December has kind of set this team back. We had our December swoon last year as well, which kind of derailed their season. But I'm trying to look at it from the most optimistic perspective as I can. If people would have said before the season that this team would be in a wild card hunt at the midway point of the season, I think most Oilers fans would have taken it, and to be 3 games above 500. I think what the disappointing part, though, is that we've seen where this team was, and after falling back this month, it's a pretty big disappointment. So they really need to end the calendar year on a good mark here against the Rangers tomorrow night, and hopefully turn things around in January.
Yeah, I think, I feel a little bit as a fan like I should be sitting on the psychiatrist's couch, right? Like, trying to unpack exactly what's happened with this team is next to impossible, right? And it happens year after year, so it would seem, despite the fact that we have 2 of the greatest players in hockey right now. And I think one of the best coaches in the league right now. I don't even know where to start. I mean, we're, 41 games into what started as, the miracle team. Mm-hmm. And even the media started to believe that this, they were talking McDavid, hitting 160, 170 points, which, by the way, could still happen. Yeah. And, they're talking about Draisaitl. At one point, there were guys tweeting and talking about, is there any possibility that he's better than Connor McDavid? And then somewhere the team just fell apart. And I was at the game on against Calgary, and it just the look on their faces, and I was only about 11 rows up, so I got a good view. The look on the faces of the players going into that, like later in the second period, into the third period, just was this defeated look. And this is the team that year after year we get to this point where they just have this, like, it seems they just fall apart. And I don't get it. I mean, that was, we're coming off what I think has had to have been the worst game of the season against our provincial arch rivals. It's, I just don't know where to begin. And part of me, is it just thinks like, what needs to happen on this team to get them to where they need to be, where they seem to, where they can come out of the gate and not have those mental errors. I don't know.
It's like you said there is a lot to unpack. I mean, honestly, we knew going into the season that this roster had some deficiencies. It wasn't a team that had incredible depth by any means. So McDavid and Draisaitl were going to have to carry a lot of the load, and maybe there's some fatigue setting in a little bit probably more with Draisaitl than with McDavid, because I don't think Connor's play has dropped at all. If anything, it's progressed, and this is coming off a major injury over the offseason. But Draisaitl maybe is, burning out a little bit. So you have to hope that the Christmas break plus this 3-day break now before their next game will give them some time to recharge the batteries. But it's tough. I mean, there were underlying numbers throughout the early part of the season that kind of showed that this team just really, really had some holes, and that the top guys were going to have to do a lot to get this team into the playoffs. And here we are 41 games in, and the Oilers are in the hunt for a playoff spot, but there are other teams with games in hand and who are, trending up while the Oilers appear to be trending down. So it's not the most positive time to record a podcast just because of the state of the team, but at the same time, we have to remain positive and just hope that the guys are going to pull out of this. And maybe Ken Holland can give them some help. I know he tried to make some internal moves recently to bring guys up from the farm and hopefully provide some offensive spark, but we'll see what happens from here, because right now this team needs a win badly to salvage the month of December at 5-8-1. So it's a bad month, but it can look a lot better than 4-9-1 if they don't get their stuff together tomorrow night.
So let's play, armchair GM or armchair coach for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
If you had this team, let's start at the coaching ranks right now. If there was something you would do, I mean, what would it be that you would do? Whether it's, bring in a motivational speaker or change up the lines or put the lines back to where they were, or, would you have changed the starting goalie night after night? What, out of what you've done so far, what would you say has been your biggest frustration with Dave Tippett right now? And you can be happy with Dave Tippett. That's not what I'm getting at. But what's been, a frustration for you so far?
Well, I guess he has a familiarity with Mike Smith, right, from their time together in Dallas and in Arizona. So it's only fair that he would lean on Smith a little more than Koskinen. And I like Dave Tippett. I think he's been a great addition, and I think he'll be with the team for many more years to come. But he has a lot of faith in the guy and doesn't maybe treat Koskinen the same way in the media, it seems like. After a bad appearance by Koskinen, he's more likely to call him out than he is to call out Smith. And that might just be Oiler fans reading into things that aren't necessarily so. I've seen it on Twitter a little bit, and then I started noticing it myself. But really, I would try to give Koskinen more starts going forward. Smith still could provide some help down the stretch run, but really, they have to play Koskinen, I think, more, because he's been by far the better goalie, and Smith has been arguably the worst or one of the worst goalies in the NHL for the last 6 weeks. So they can't afford to keep putting him in there and having a sub 900 save percentage. So that would be one move that I would like to see them do, just because Koskinen is going to get this team into the playoffs, if anyone is. And I know there's some concerns that he faded down the stretch last year, so maybe they don't want to increase his workload too much, but that's just the first one that comes to mind when you say that.
So what's your thought going into the next game? You start Koskinen or you start Smith after?
Yeah, well, they only play 9 games in January because there's another one of those 10, 11-day breaks like last year because of the All-Star break attaching into the Oilers' bye week. So they're going to get a lot of time off there. They don't play a lot of games going forward. So this is the time when they could probably ride Koskinen quite a bit. And even if they play him all 10 games between now and the end of January, I don't think that would burn him out too much. And then down the stretch run, there's, I think, 32 games to go. So maybe you give... I'd be willing to give Koskinen 22 and Smith maybe 10 depending on if Smith can even get his game together. I know there are Shane Starrett supporters in the minors too, but I think the earliest we'll see Starrett, if any time, is next season. And the Oilers could still bring in a veteran backup goalie again, maybe a little younger than Smith, though, in the offseason to kind of push Starrett in training camp.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say it while we're talking about it. I'm not Starrett's a great Starrett. He's a great starter for an AHL team, but I'd be surprised if we ever see him playing any NHL games. I'm more inclined to think, Skinner is the up and coming.
Oh, absolutely.
Guy, yeah, and yeah,
he's younger. In terms of readiness, Starrett's older by at least 3 or 4 years, I believe. I think he's a '94 born, so he might be 4 years older than Skinner. But look, Skinner won back-to-back games this weekend, right? I think Bob Stauffer tweeted it out. He made 68 saves the last 2 nights. So
I watched him in one Stockton game, and he was unreal. Yep. He was great. Yeah.
So, I mean, you might want to bring the goals against average down a little bit. He let in 5 tonight in a 7-5 win, but, we like those high-scoring games too. So that's a guy who I think has some potential, but at the same time, there are other goalies in the system that are really intriguing prospects too. I mean, Olivier Rodrigue, still in the junior ranks and with Canada, and obviously over in Russia, we have a 21-year-old advanced prospect who was drafted this year as a triple overager, Ilya Konovalov, and he is a KHL All-Star this year, and he won the Rookie of the Year in that league last year. And from some of the people I've heard talk on the various Edmonton radio shows and written about, seem to think that he's one of the maybe front runners to eventually become a starter in the NHL, that the Oilers might have a gem there. So that could be a guy, still young, but he's signed for next year too. So maybe the following season, when he's 22, we see him in Bakersfield, or shortly after that, competing for a job in the NHL, because that's a guy who's a little older than some of the other Oilers prospects and might be ready to go sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get back to Koskinen and the guys that we have right now. Koskinen's performed way better than anyone expected this year. So, I expected this to be a trying year from a goaltending standpoint. And, I've really felt good about what Koskinen's brought to the table every night. His glove hand still, guys are shooting high glove, but he's been better. He's made some adjustments, and they're not scoring the easy ones anymore, which is great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at the guy's overall record since he became an Oiler, he's 38, 29, and 8. So he's got a winning record as an Oiler. So there, maybe I think a lot of the criticism comes from how he faded down the stretch last year, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast. He had a pretty solid start to last season, and then this year he only had 1 regulation loss in his first 14 appearances, I believe. So really, he's been strong, other than down the stretch last year when he appeared to get tired because he might have not been used to that workload, and the Oilers weren't playing that well in front of him either. But this is a guy, while we might not love the contract at 4.5, you'd probably like to see that. I'll go as far to say $1 million to $1.5 million lower. Honestly, this is a guy who's provided pretty solid goaltending for the Oilers, and I think that he's a guy they should be able to count on for the next 2 years until that contract wraps up. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, the contract's maybe the one question mark in that whole thing, right? He'd be, and I think the contract is what most Oilers fans were most upset about. It seems, player-wise, some of the things Chiarelli did were all right, just the monetary value that they put on them and the challenges that came with, created a whole new set of challenges for the Oilers. Let's, so I've asked you now, if you're a coach, you probably would have started Koskinen a little bit more than Tippett did. And what about from a lineup perspective? What's your thoughts in terms of how he's played the lines so far?
Well, his main go-to has been McDavid and Draisaitl together, and I think that's been too hard for him to resist breaking up for very long. They've tried it for short stretches this year, and it always seems to go back to him, and he's not the only Oiler coach to find that out. But there's a lot of fourth line guys being used in third line roles. There might be some second line guys who are third liners being used in second line roles as well. So it's not the deepest roster, as we said. So when we see guys moving around, it's just to try and get something going, and then you'll maybe get a brief hot streak from a guy like Granlund, and then maybe Archibald and Sheehan have a little hot streak, but you're just not seeing it consistent enough. Like you'd love Nygaard to have 7 goals by now, or you'd love to see Archibald with 5 goals, or Kara with 7-8 goals or something like that. But it's just they haven't taken as big of a step forward as I think the Oilers were hoping for this year, and it's been so reliant on their top guys to do it. And I mean, you look at a guy like James Neal, even if he never got a goal the rest of the season, he'd still have a pretty successful year with 16 goals, but he certainly has slowed down as of late, and I think that the expectations were that he would get closer to 30 after that great start. And Nugent Hopkins has had a tough year offensively too. I mean, he also injured his hand, which can't make it any easier to pass or shoot the puck, but yeah, that second line hasn't even lived up to expectations with Neal and Nuge. They're doing most of their damage on the power play. So yeah, it's really the only line that you can truly count on for production is that top line with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Kassian. It kind of takes me back to the early 2000s teams where it would be or even late 90s, it'd be a line like Guerin, Smith, and Waite, Carter, and Smith. One of those lines where like they had to carry the load. Not that they had some really good supporting cast, but just weren't providing the type of offense. They only had one line that was really driving the scoring, and that's kind of how this feels right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has been a tough go for this team to get any type of scoring outside of the top line. But I think, and I hesitate to say this because it's one of those touchy subjects in Oilers fandom, which is Nuge isn't pulling his weight, right? Like he's not doing what he should be doing offensively. Now, we're not talking Tobias Reeder type of criticism, but he should be out there getting a few more points, should he not? Or you think that his role should be different than what we're expecting from him?
Well, obviously the expectations are high for Nuge as a first overall pick. And you hear that more from other fan bases than you do from in Edmonton because he's such a loved player. He has tremendous character. This is a guy who's been the longest serving member of the team. And he's stuck it out through 7 out of 8 non-playoff years, and now in his 9th season with the team. So that's a guy you'd love to be able to have some playoff success as well. But just after scoring a career high in goals and points last year, just to be taking a bit of a step back this year, it is disappointing. I'm still a big Nuge supporter. I think he does a lot of little things well. I think he's great at turning the puck over. He reads the play so well. He gets in good positions in his own end. But yeah, you'd like to see some more points on the board right now. And with him not being the lead guy on the power play, how he used to be the setup man. He's in more of a supporting role, even there where that was his bread and butter. So it might be hard for him to become a consistent 70-point player, but he does need to provide more than he is right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt. He definitely is seemingly, if you want to say he's gripping the stick more or he's just having some challenges. He's not doing what he can on an offensive standpoint. Of course, he needs the line mates to do a little bit more. Maybe we're just asking too much of him.
I think that he does need a faster player to play with. And there are a number of names that have been floated out there in the trade market that, could come in and, give him some help. Like I said, he plays with James Neal. James Neal has 16 goals, so it's great that Nuge has a winger that can score. The only problem is that neither of them are big 5-on-5 offensive drivers. They're more complementary secondary support scoring guys. So when you have those two guys playing together, and Neal probably can't keep up with Nuge as much either, it makes it hard for them to get up into play and really drive some scoring. So you'd almost think that Nuge needs a quicker player to play with, and then Neal can still do his damage scoring at the side of the net on the power play and chipping in some 5-on-5 offense as well. But yeah, they do need to get another speedster on that line. And they've tried Nygaard, as you asked earlier in the podcast, some other lineup situations. Nygaard just hasn't been able to seize that opportunity. So I'm still waiting for a guy like that to really come out and assert himself.
Yeah, well, we know he's fast now, right? He won the Oilers skills competition, which would have been last night. And now, there's no hiding anymore. Well, but we knew he was fast before.
Oh, of course. That was one of the books on him and Gaetan Haas when Holland brought them in last offseason. The only thing you have to ask is, and I would never accuse Connor of letting off the gas, but to let someone win. But he, Sunday afternoon, late morning, early afternoon skills competition. Was that his best run that he could possibly do? I think at the NHL All-Star game, when the world's watching and it's at 7 p.m. and prime time TV is on him, we might see a half a gear better than today.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
But still, kudos to Nygaard.
And put a puck in his hands. See if he can skate.
Absolutely. If they did this skills competition at the All-Star game, fastest lap, where you had to handle the puck, and if the puck fell off your stick, you had to pick it up before you could continue your lap around the ice, he would absolutely win that competition.
Absolutely.
Every year. He wins it anyway every year, but then he would really win it.
So let's talk now. Another question I asked, if you were armchair GM, and we're looking at what Ken Holland has done early part of the season. Everyone thought this man's a miracle. He got rid of the Lucic contract, put in Neal. Neal scoring seemingly at will on the power play. It's these guys are giving the Oilers, we're talking about Nygaard and Haas. They're giving the Oilers some much needed speed that they didn't have last year. He did. He had this sort of, thing going for him that was the mastery of Ken Holland, and we're not going to touch the minors. We're not going to do that. As we know, Manning and Granlund get put on waivers for purpose of reassignment to Bakersfield and not picked up. And then in return, we've got up now Yamamoto and Lagesson. If you're Ken Holland, I guess first question, did you lose out on the Taylor Hall lottery? Or maybe it's a win if you see that Arizona's going through a bit of a slump lately. Would you have done something different? Would you be in more of a rush to get new players? What's your thought if you had the GM job today? Okay. Something you might do different?
Well, As for, we'll just get the Hall thing out of the way first. I wouldn't have traded for him based on what they were asking for, because the Oilers surely would have had to give up at least one of Samorukov, Bouchard, or Broberg, and I wasn't willing to separate with any of those prospects. You're probably going to have to attach a first-round pick to it, or a conditional first or something. This is a pretty strong draft coming up. There are no guarantees the Oilers make the playoffs, so that pick, you never know, could be a lottery winner. You don't want to give that up either. There's just the asking price, while I don't think the Devils necessarily got the greatest return for him, because they knew that this was a player who wasn't going to re-sign. It actually just, it still feels weird that Hall's a Coyote. I don't think my brain is even fully processed yet. I still think of him as a Devil for some reason. But yeah, I don't.
Sorry, as the Devil or a Devil?
Yeah, no. Despite all the people who criticized Hall during his time in Edmonton, I was always a huge Taylor Hall fan, and I would welcome him back with open arms. However, I would rather do it in free agency, when the only thing it costs you is money, as opposed to paying prospects to acquire him or draft picks. So that I wasn't necessarily willing to do. However, we'll see what the asking price is, because if he wants $10.5 million for a player who's turning 29 next fall and has a long injury history, that is something that would be really tough to say that you want to do. I would almost tend to walk away from that. But getting back to the other thing, so yeah, you don't want to lose a guy like Broberg, Bouchard, or Samorukov. Those are three excellent defensive prospects, and they really give the Oilers some hope on the blue line going forward. And as for Lagesson coming up now, I'm really excited to see him get his first NHL opportunity, because this is a guy who was drafted in Leon's draft year. So, he's been an Oilers prospect for over 5 years, about 5.5 years now. So he's waited long enough, and time for him to get in there. And, if someone was willing to take Chris Russell the final year and a half of his salary off the Oilers books, that'd be a huge help, because as good of a soldier as Russell has been for the Oilers, Cowboy makes $4 million a year. Lagesson makes $740,000 a year. So the Oilers would be saving $4 million in cap space, and we know how much they need that right now to try and bring in a forward, who I'm sure we'll talk about some of the forwards in a bit on the podcast. But yeah, they could really use that space, and I'm not saying Russell's been bad by any means, but they definitely could. They definitely could use that money in other ways. And as for Yamamoto, maybe that's the speedy guy who plays with Nugent Hopkins. I see Yamamoto as more of a support scoring player anyway, so might not be the guy to drive it, but he at least would give Nuge a quicker option to play with. Or perhaps they move Cassian down to play with Nuge, and then you move Yamamoto up to the top line. He showed some chemistry with McDavid the past 2 years, both times when he had a short opportunity with him early on in the season. The only problem is that he would have to go up against top defenders every night, and that's a tough ask for a 21-year-old who is undersized as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So we're now back to the original question, I guess. Is there anything you would do as a GM that Holland hasn't done?
Yeah. I would really try to bring in some help for this team. And, Holland might not want to spend too many assets like we talked about on players for this season. I think he wants to really see where this team is closer to the deadline. But at the same time, why are we waiting? If they're in the playoff hunt right now, give them some help. Show some faith in this team, and give them an extra player to give them a boost. There are so many forwards out there that I really like. And, one name that's been floated out there recently by Elliot Friedman on Oilers Now with Bob Stauffer the other day was Brandon Saad. And apparently the Oilers are in the mix for Saad. And when you look at this guy, that's a guy who could probably really help this team. And I know that I think he has an injury right now, but
minor injury,
but look at the guy's track record. I'm just going to bring up his HockeyDB page here. So in the last, would it be 6 seasons before this year, what's he got? 19, 23, 31, 24, 18, and 23 goals. So some pretty successful offense there. It averages out to somewhere in the 20s, and this year he's got 11 goals in 36 games, so on pace for another 20-plus goal season. This is a guy who's 27 years old, left wing, can score. I mean, has won a Stanley Cup, so he's got that experience. Could be a big addition to this team if they were able to bring him in, though. I wonder what the asking cost is. That would be my move, though.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So I think, what you're saying is what a lot of people are screaming for is the time is now for Holland to make some type of a move of help for this team. And, a lot of people think it's just maybe one or two pieces, right? Like something to get another line running, right? And, whether that's Saad or whoever that ends up being, early on, I would have loved to see, Pajot.
Mm-hmm. And, that's probably been the most mentioned, he's probably been the most mentioned name in oil country over the last month or so. And I talked about that with Larry on the last podcast that I did for 99 Forever, and there's other names out there, Chris Kreider, Tyler Toffoli, Kyle Palmieri. These are all guys who could give the Oilers some scoring help. Even Galchenyuk, Sheary, there's a few names that he put out there too. So yeah, there are options. It just depends what the asking price is going to be, and can Holland pull the trigger on the deal. So we'll see what happens. But we've mentioned it how many times. This lineup needs some added scoring, and we can't just wait for all the prospects to be ready. As much as we want to see Yamamoto come up and tear it up here and be the next Jordan Eberle, we really have to bring in some veteran guys and then let these younger guys eventually push them out of spots, but not just hand everything to them. And I think that's what Holland's thinking too.
Yeah, 100%. I would like to see him, find just the right mix of prospects to bring in somebody who's going to make a little bit of an added difference. And, Saad might be that guy. And let's hope that it's something right away. So let's chat. You've got Yamamoto up, you've got Lagesson up. Lineups. This is reported by Jason Greger, and I think Stauffer or Jack Michaels had the lineups in practice. Yesterday's lines. We had Neal with McDavid and Cassian, Kara with RNH and Gags, Nygaard, Draisaitl, and Chason. Sheahan, Haas, and Patrick Russell. Archibald was not on the ice, which I'm not sure what that amounts to. We had Clefbaum and Bear, Jones and Larson, Nurse and Russell. Where do you think the lineups, if you had to guess, what do you think the lineups end up being against New York tomorrow night?
I have a feeling that if they're going to bring Yamamoto up, they're going to try and get him onto one of the top two skilled lines. So, let's think about this. I think I don't think they're going to break up that top trio just because that's the team's go-to line and what they can always count on to at least provide some offense. So we won't see McDavid, Draisaitl, and Cassian split up. Maybe Yamamoto comes in and knocks someone out of a spot there. I know Neal likes to play the right side, but that's Yamamoto's natural wing. So could Yamamoto move over to the left side? Then you have two guys playing on their off wing. It's hard to say, but I think that Yamamoto will probably be in the top six for sure. I think he'll be at least given that opportunity. And if he proves that he he still isn't ready for it, despite having a good stretch of games down in the minors, then they can move him to the third line or do whatever. But I think he's going to get the chance to start there at least.
So I wonder, do you think Yamamoto knew anything about the call-up before his game against Stockton? Because he probably played one of his best games of the last 2 seasons against Stockton the other night. He had a couple of goals. I think he had 3 points. They had him out in the last minute. It was a 1-goal game, holding the lead. They were on the PK. He was doing everything. He was on fire. This is the time. I mean, if he's going to come in and play on a top line, he's coming in after what is, just an amazing confidence booster in this team. Obviously, it wouldn't surprise me if, what's the Condors coach name? Should know this.
Jay Woodcroft.
If Woodcroft sat down with him prior to the game and said, hey, look, he would have known that Manning and Legason were on waivers. I think pre-game, I believe they announced it before the game started.
They announced it in the afternoon that those two had been put on waivers. So I think the Condors knew that 1 forward and 1 defenseman were coming up. It's just a matter of who they were going to be. And Yamamoto probably knew that he was in line to be one of the guys. So when we look at it, Legason had been called up before once. He didn't play in any games, so he probably thought that with Jones already being with the team, he'd be the next call-up. And as for Yamamoto, this is a guy who's had a pretty good year in the minors, 16 points in 23 games, including, I believe, something like 8 in his last 9 or something like that. He's had a pretty good run of games as of late, so I'm sure he knew that he was in line for that spot, whether or not Woodcroft mentioned it to him or not.
Absolutely, and you love to see a kid come out and show that he really wants it with the game that he played against Stockton. He was outstanding. He played. I watched majority of that game, and he was outstanding. So happy that he's coming up on a high. Did really well. I'm excited to see what he does. I think he's going to end up probably on the second line, and with either Nuge. More likely in my mind, he's playing with Nuge, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, because if we look at the lines from the other day, right, it was Neil, McDavid, Cassian, Kara, RNH, Gagne, Nygaard, Draisaitl, Chason, Sheehan, Haas, Russell, and maybe that is just to wake up some of their guys. Like, are we going to try this 3-center again? Because Draisaitl's play has dipped as of late. Maybe that was a message sent putting him on the third line for practice. But we all know everything's going to get shook up as soon as you interject these guys into the lineup. So you bring up Yamamoto. Well, does he automatically take Gagne's spot on the second right wing slot? I would think so. So if they are going to stick with these lines, then Yamo would probably be brought in for that spot, because I don't think that they're going to play him on the fourth line or anything like that, because then you're just completely wasting his skill. So those lines, I wouldn't read too much into him yet until tomorrow. I think we'll have a pretty good sense of tomorrow's morning's practice, what the lines are going to be for the next game. But it's going to be interesting to see where those guys end up playing tomorrow.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the one part that I'm most interested about is defensively. Who, if anyone, I can't imagine them bringing up Legason and not playing him. So it means somebody's likely to sit. They had Jones sitting on the second D pairing with Larson. I thought, and I've been happy. Nurse is either everyone's favorite whipping boy or he's your favorite player. You got both ends of the spectrum with this guy. Like you have fans that would trade him in an instant, and you've got fans that would pay him $10 million if he asked. Maybe not $10 million, but they'd pay him $6.5 or $7. Mm-hmm. Right? He was awful in the Calgary game. And, and that's fine. Everybody's allowed a bad game. He just, made some serious mental errors. And there's been a lot of times this year where he's made those types of errors. I think, the one kid that has really sort of proven himself and maybe deserves a shot with Clefbaum on the top pairing is definitely Bear. I think he's been pretty good and pretty steady, and unbelievable poise and patience with the puck. Really love him getting the puck out the way he has. It also might give him a little bit of the extra minutes to kind of maybe boost the offensive production of this team, because I think we've been sorely lacking a real good puck mover playing tons of minutes on that back end. Who do you take out, or do you take anybody out? You mentioned Lagesson being brought up because maybe Benning's not ready, and I can't believe we are missing Benning, but we are. I was never a big fan last year. I would have sent him to the ECHL if I could have, but he's proven he's worthy of being on the team, at least in a third pairing role this year.
Yeah. I know that Benning isn't maybe a fan favorite, but at the same time, I think he's a pretty good quality sixth defenseman on your team. And if you have him as a number 7, then you're in really good shape, because this is a guy who's in his 4th NHL season now. He's mid-20s, has some experience, looked phenomenal in the 2017 playoffs. I don't think he's ever come close to getting back to the form that he was that spring, but this is a guy who, has some ability and can do things. I mean, he won the hardest slap shot today, so that's at least something in his favor at this Oilers skills competition. But how I would run the lines, I still like keeping Nurse and Bear together for now. I think that those two feed off each other really well. Bear makes the nice smooth passes, and Nurse can skate the puck up ice, so they both have their strengths. And I like how Bear has a good one-timer too and can sneak in from the point. I'd like him to see him do it more, and maybe he'll start to make those plays more confidently as he gets older. Clefbaum and Larson, those two guys have great chemistry together, and always like to have a pair that really knows each other well. So I think that those two big guys can still be a decent pair, despite what some people think about them. And for the bottom pairing, that's maybe where you have Jones and Lagesson. The only downside to that is that you have two raw rookies playing together. So maybe you have to do some adjustments and have Larson with one and Clefbaum with the other, just to kind of shelter them a little bit and give them a little bit of NHL mentorship, because it could be tough to have both of them figuring out the NHL game at the same time. So we'll see how those lines get run in practice tomorrow, but I would do something like that.
So here's a question for you. Do you think in any way Larson's return has anything to do with the slump? I mean, really, no. That's when it started.
Yeah, I would not attribute Larson being a negative factor on this team. I would say, I'm not saying that he's the be-all, end-all, but I would say that it was a culmination of the schedule getting tougher and the Oilers not closing out games that they should against weaker opponents when they had the chance, like Ottawa, like the Kings, and kind of getting off to bad starts, bad goaltending from Smith, and just poor execution overall. There's a lot of things that you could really hang this rough patch on, but I wouldn't say that Adam Larson is the antithesis of it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would, put the blame squarely on Adam Larson, but I don't think people have put enough thought into it. And I don't think it's Adam Larson per se. But when I look at it and I look back and I remember the lineups and how we were playing and the defense, and I've been saying now for, the greater part of a year and a bit that what this team sorely needs is somebody to move the puck on the back end. And I think what happens with Larson is you get a guy that is one hell of a great defender, but he's shit at moving the puck up the ice, right? Like you look at the passing that Bear brings to the table, from a offensive standpoint. If you can't get the puck out of your zone, well, you're bound to stay in your zone. And then the reverse, right, is, you're bound to score fewer goals. And if you got Larson up on the top pairing with Clefbaum, then you know that Larson's playing, a greater amount of minutes. I don't think that it's a big coincidence. I think that, we're missing somebody who can move the puck. So if we had Clefbaum and Bear up there playing top minutes, maybe Clefbaum can make up for some of the defensive, maybe rookie mistakes Bear might play or might make. But I think that Bear, he's shown that he's committed to, his fitness. He's committed to being an NHLer. He can put together and play big minutes, I think, for the club, like from a fitness level. Can he perform with the same level of poise and patience that, I think he brings? But my point being is, I think the very day that Larson got back, the composition of the team changed. I don't think that says Larson's a bad player. I just think it changes the way the lineup's been used a little bit on the back end. And I don't think enough play has been put on that. That's just my thought on it.
Yeah, look, there have been people who have been down on Larson since the second he got to Edmonton because of the player he was traded for. And I don't think that you are criticizing him for that in this moment at all. It's mainly because of what he is or isn't able to do out there. This is a guy who reminds me a lot of Jason Smith. He'll sacrifice his body for the team. He'll be rough on opponents, clear the front of the net, be hard in the corners. He just plays a mean game, and that's a value too, especially in the playoffs when you need that kind of tight checking. But I like Larson. I don't think that he's my favorite type of defenseman. And it's like you said, he doesn't move the puck exceptionally well, but he does do some things well in his own end, like I just mentioned. And it's funny because when you're right, he isn't a great puck mover, although it just came to mind because we were talking about Yamamoto earlier. He did set up Yamamoto on a beautiful spring pass for his only goal in the NHL to this point. If you can go back and watch it on YouTube against the Bruins, he sent probably 100-foot pass up ice to Yamamoto from his own zone to zip in on Tuukka and roof it over the glove. So I don't know why that just came to mind, but yeah, you'd like to see him make plays a little more consistently. And there's always this trend in hockey now that you want all your defensemen to be puck-moving defensemen, but I think as we've seen on some teams, you don't have to have every defenseman be
and don't
a carbon
get me wrong.
copy of each other.
I don't think that there's two things here. One is I think Larson is a hell of a defenseman. Mm-hmm. Like I think he is stellar, and I don't bear any ill will to Larson because of the Taylor Hall trade. In fact, I always forget about that, and I know you know. Yeah. I know you know that, but I do think though that his if you're going to have Clefbaum and Larson together, I just don't think that works. I think that you have to have put. You're not going to see it, but put Larson and Bear together, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just think those two together we've had them as a top line now for, well, when Clefbaum's not injured or when Larson's not injured, but we've not had success with them together. You know, I mean, and we could say that about any line because we've not had any success in the Oilers organization. But I really feel that, you know, this team needs something a little bit beyond in the back end. And we were getting a little bit of that early on in the season when Larson was out. In fact, I was quite happy with the way our defense was performing. I think that we need, you know, to separate those two. And I don't know. You know, I mean, it seems the obvious to put Clefbaum and Larson together, right? Like they're your top D. But I think we got to think a little bit outside of what's been the norm. If I was, you know, I posed the question to you earlier, if you were coach for the Oilers and you had the say, this would be my say. And I think we're going to finally see it here against New York on New Year's Eve. But that's, to me, if you look at, you know, what one of the major differences between the Oilers at the beginning of the season and the Oilers now, where we're in, you know, a nosedive, is Larson. And I just don't think that enough people have called that out. And, you know, when I say calling it out, I'm not in any way saying Larson is an awful player, because I would, you know, I'd have him on any team, right? He is, you know, any player that's played against him from a defensive standpoint will tell you he plays a hard game. He's incredible defensively, right? And he's a smart player. He's obviously, you know, he's a vet. He's everything you want in a good, solid-nosed defenseman on the back end. But what he is not is an offensive defenseman. And that's what we need. In fact, last year, one of the things that I used to get upset about was we had a ton of players on the team that I thought were capable of better numbers offensively, but they didn't have the skill level of Draisaitl and McDavid to get the puck out of the zone on their own. They needed somebody to get it out of the zone for them before they could show that, you know, offensive talent or, you know, banging the puck in the net. Sheahan is a player like that, right? Like maybe Haas, maybe Nygaard, maybe these guys, right? Maybe they're the kind of guys that need somebody to get the puck out of the zone for them. Because you know how it is. If you had Draisaitl and you had McDavid out there, you just pass them the puck wherever, and they'll do the work, right? But some of these other guys need somebody to get the puck out. So thoughts on that, I guess, is, I mean, obviously this has been something I've been thinking about, so I'm putting you kind of on the spot. But. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there too. So basically, just to summarize, you want a defenseman with more offensive upside than Larson
on the playing top minutes with Clefbaum.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that answer is going to come this season. However, we got Broberg coming, we've got Bouchard coming, we've got Samorukov coming, as I mentioned. You'd like to hope one of those guys is going to be in that spot eventually. How I picture it down the road is that Broberg and Bouchard will be the Oilers' top pairing. I think they both have different skill sets that would benefit each other, and they have different hands. So Broberg being the left-handed guy who can really rush the puck up ice and get the puck zone to zone, and then you have Bouchard, who is a brilliant passer of the puck.
Yeah, so we get that from a prospect standpoint.
Yeah,
but what do you do right now? I mean, you have a guy, and I get the challenge that I think I can sense is running through your head.
Yeah,
is you've got a guy that's as good as Larson is. There is no doubt he is he's a top defender in this league.
In terms of playing defense, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's stellar. He's hard nosed. He like I have heard players say he's just tough to play against, right?
Yeah.
And I totally respect the guy for that. But what I'm saying is you've got him out there with Clefbaum, and I think that you're missing out on that offensive side of the game. And I think that it's, if maybe you need to take Larson out and put him in distinct situations, not the ones that you're putting him in and giving him the minutes that he's getting, is what I'm saying. And I think that it's hard I would imagine, if you're Tippett, just as if I was, in his shoes, that I would say, look, I've got this guy that we know is, a veteran, he's a leader, he's all of these things, and you want to give him the top line minutes, top D pairing minutes. But I just don't think that's the right place for him on this squad. That's what I'm saying.
No, that's fair. I think you've laid it out pretty well there. This team needs someone to be in that spot, but I don't know if that answer is coming. I think that Bear has had a fairly good offensive year so far as a rookie, and Nurse, I think, has more to give offensively. We saw what he can do last year, but it's just a matter of, can they put it all together now?
Are we in a situation where we've got nothing to lose? Do you know what I mean? Is Tippett at that point of the season, or we're an hour in now.
You certainly got something to lose. Yeah, just let me know how long you want to go here, bud.
Yeah. No, I mean, we'll go till we go. But we're,
Yes, we have something to lose. The Oilers fans have certainly gotten their hopes up about playoffs this spring. When you start 5-0, and the Oilers were in first place in the Pacific Division for 58 days, lost it for a day, and then I think reclaimed it for another 4 days or so before losing it again. And now it looks like that will be tough to take back. But nonetheless, when you're in first place for the better part of 2 months, there is a certain expectation that you are going to make the playoffs. At the end of November, this team was first in the Pacific and second in the conference. So that just shows you what a 4-8-1 stretch can do. And that's why I said they need to salvage what they can out of this month and get a win against the Rangers on New Year's Eve. It's a very necessary 2 points that they need to pull out. So yes, there is something to lose. People talk about wasting McDavid's years. He isn't even in his prime yet, so I'm not concerned about that. But I am concerned about this franchise going longer than it needs to without being in the playoffs. We're looking at becoming the first team in NHL history to miss the playoffs in 13 out of 14 years, which is just unheard of. So yeah, there definitely is something to lose here. They can't just sit back. They have to push here.
Absolutely, 100%. I think you said exactly what, kind of what I wanted to hear, because we are at a point now where, I might have actually at the beginning of the season been all right with another season without the playoffs if we'd been competitive. Yeah. But then we went on that tear. Yeah, now we saw it. We got our hopes up. Now, playoffs have to be the end result.
Yeah.
There's got to be something that kicks in for this team. I think, you saw Calgary after the Peters debacle, after he gets kicked out and they go on a 7-game win streak. They're having fun. They're doing warm-ups without their helmets. They're listening to music. They're finding this sort of team game, although they've sort of dropped off lately. Now you got Vancouver who's going on a hot streak for who knows what reason. The Oilers got to find a spark. They have to find something. They have to come together as a team. They've got to start to believe that they can do it. Is it leadership? Is it coaching? Is it GM? Is it team? I mean, these guys, Draisaitl and McDavid, could carry the team conceivably, but they also, they need the help defensively to keep that puck out of the net. There were a couple of goals in that Calgary game that, I saw the air go out of the tires. It had to have been the second period. There was the Nurse, when Nurse missed the puck and Calgary went and scored, and I saw McDavid skating back to the bench and the look in his eyes, which I've had, as a player, when your goalie just doesn't make the save when you want it, and that, that frustration, that look was on his face. I saw, Cassian skate by the Flames bench, and Talbot said something to him, and Cassian in the third period just kind of gives him this look of, oh man, we're here again, right? This team needs to find a little bit of a spark. They've got lots to lose.
Absolutely.
I think you're 100% accurate on that. So here's where we ended tonight's podcast. I want to thank you for listening. Remember, again, please register for the Oilers Live Cup and, do what you can to help out. We'd love to have you there. We've got a lot of great guests. It's Hunter the mascot's birthday, and he'll be in attendance. It's February 29th of this year. Go to the website, oilers.live. Thanks again for subscribing. If you could, give us a good review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, SoundCloud. Follow us on Twitter. Do whatever you can to help spread the word and so that we can keep delivering good content and just having fun doing this. I do it for the love of hockey. And thanks again. Bye.
Oilers Live.